Hi, I'm Mikolajczyk, and I'll be discussing this paper titled A Study of Creative Development with an IoT-based Audiovisual System, Creative Strategies and Impacts for System Design. This paper is centered around a qualitative study with musicians and an interactive art installation, which is shown below here. The art installation was a light and sound synthesizer that had a bespoke interface for controlling a multi-speaker and lighting system at the same time. And it also made use of a novel Internet of Things architecture, what we call a distributed synthesizer. The research is about how expert musicians and sound artists approach the opportunity to work with something new to them, and our aim is to put forward what we observed about their uptake and the strategy of how they use the distributed synthesizer. And from this, we describe how examples for learning about a novel creative technology such as ours relates to the strategies that we observed the artists using. The context of this research is creative design for network devices with specific attention to artworks that make use of spatially distributed media. We refer to these kinds of artworks as media multiplicities, which make use of amalgamations of existing media, such as a wall of screens or a speaker array, that are coordinated to create the art. Using an IoT architecture to make the distributed synthesizer also ties the research into the Internet of Sounds and Internet of Musical Things, which we're looking at here through an interaction design lens. And our attention to examples in this paper is informed by example-based development. For the musicians, we built an interface in Ableton Live that's shown there below as an example for the musicians to be able to understand the system with. The art installation is a system of 400 lights and 100 distributed speakers that are connected to a network of Raspberry Pi Zero computers that are each controlled over Wi-Fi using our interface we showed just before. So the synthesizer is distributed in the sense that there are 100 parallel instances of a synthesizer generating audio in synchrony. Additionally, the Raspberry Pi is also controlled lights, and in the interface that we built, we show the participants lots of ways that they can combine the different media types. So this video here shows a scenario that I mentioned in the paper. So there's a gradient across the lights here, and the sound is moving across the speakers, and the sound of the speakers varies from one end of the structure to the other. So there's a gradual change of tone that is mapped to a gradual change of color in this example. So from working with the artists and the system, the two research questions we have are about strategies and examples for working with this kind of technology. So what are the strategies that artists use, and how can examples best help them is what we're interested in. To understand these aspects of the creative process, we worked very closely with 6 artists who were curated by an art gallery and creative arts organization to put on a concert series with us. And we use observation and interviews as methods, and we filmed and recorded rehearsals on a prototype system and had discussions with them extensively in the months leading up to when we had access in the performance space. And then we had rehearsals in the actual space that we filmed as well. We filmed and recorded the performances, and we also conducted follow-up interviews with the artists. So on the limits of this approach, we clearly had a very small sample size, but our involvement in this led us to having a very deep understanding and very clear understanding of what they wanted to do and what they wanted to achieve throughout this time. Okay, here's the summary of the 6 participants, and I'll take this opportunity to describe their creative work. So P1 and P5 made art installations that ran over a period of hours. P1 distributed field recordings around the 100 speakers, while P5 used their own rhythm generator program to control the system and performed alongside it with invited musicians. P2 substituted the normal sample player that they use while playing the drums for a MIDI controller to control both their regular samples as well as the distributed synthesizer and lights. P3 made a light show exclusively for her music that responded to melodies and control that she had in her Ableton set when she was performing. P4 did an improvisation using a granular sample player and controlling the lights in the distributed synthesizer in real time. And finally, P6 performed their regular set but made use of our lights and an FM synthesizer to have a spatial audio and light component in their performance. So 2 of the authors did a thematic analysis, and from the gathered data, we generated 4 themes that we used to describe the artist strategy with the distributed synthesizer. The 4 themes are outset ideas, which are codes that were linked to describing their initial plan for working with the system. Features explored were descriptions of the aspects of the synthesizer that they wanted to use or that they did use. Collaboration with the developers is the role that we played with them as they developed their work. And the context of the installation is how the space that held the art installation influenced what they did in the process. So from these themes, we generalized about the strategy that these 6 particular artists use. Strategy 1, we called conceptual explorers. Strategy 2, we called adopters of examples. And strategy 3, we called stipulators of creative intent. So for strategy 1, the artists didn't have a clear idea what they wanted to do from the outset, but they were continually seeking interesting ways to make the system behave in new particular ways. Strategy 2, by contrast, they had a very specific idea what they wanted to do from the beginning, and worked with us really closely to learn the capabilities. But once they saw a way of getting our system to work for their creative goal, they worked mostly independently with the Ableton plugin on their own. Strategy 3 was again different in that the artists had a very clear idea about what they wanted from the outset, but they also passed on creative license to us, and we worked very closely with them to achieve what they wanted. So for the use of examples, strategy 1 people who were continually seeking out new ways of working from our example also based what they wanted to do on a technology that they already had a wide scope with. For P4, they discussed our system in relation to Robert Henke's granulator. And for P5, what the system did was redesigned to work with his own interface, his own rhythm generator. For strategy 2, for P3 and P6, the example was what they used in their live performance. So their strategy involved an understanding and working with the constraints and affordances of the system. And finally, for strategy 3, they did have a very clear understanding about how things worked and what the affordances were, but by contrast to everyone else, they asked us to use the example. They gave us directions that we came back at them with. So to shed some light on the discussion then, most of what we express in that section of the paper can be really considered in relation to examples as monoliths versus modular components. The Ableton plugin that we made is a monolith in the sense that it is a singular entity, whereas modular components are much more small single-use interfaces that only bring a few parameters ready to hand. While our monolith for adopters for strategy 2 worked out of the box and didn't require much configuration for us to work with stipulators, strategy 3, we think that being able to break things down into smaller components while not bringing as many parameters ready to hand immediately is better for thinking through possibilities with the system. So in general, our argument is that monoliths get the job done, but modular components are going to be better for understanding complex and novel situations. In conclusion, we've described and theorized about how the artists approach working with our novel IoT audiovisual system. And while our monolithic example worked in certain respects, being able to customize and hack this example was essential for being able to work with all the different artists. Finally, moving forward, we are very interested to understand how these kinds of close collaborations with artists and designers can help inform the development of IoT systems for creative contexts. Thank you so much for listening.